Venezuela claims the world's largest proven oil reserves, over 300 billion barrels, mostly locked in the Orinoco Belt's extra-heavy crude. Yet, as of January 2026, production hovers around 800,000 barrels per day. That's a mere fraction of its potential. The mainstream narrative paints this as a tale of inevitable decline, a once wealthy nation crippled by corruption, mismanagement, and U.S. sanctions. Its oil era faded into irrelevance. Headlines scream about economic collapse, hyperinflation, and mass exodus, suggesting the wells are running dry or the resource is cursed beyond redemption. But that's the lie everyone buys. Dig into the numbers, and a different picture emerges. In late 2025, Chevron ramped up operations under eased sanctions, adding tens of thousands of barrels daily from joint ventures. By early 2026, fresh investments from private firms are projected to inject $1.4 billion into the sector. That's up 55% from last year. Production isn't exhausted, it's been deliberately throttled. The Orinoco's tar-like oil requires advanced tech, steam injection, diluents, and upgraders. Foreign expertise once provided it, but politics chased them away. Now, with geopolitical shifts under a new U.S. administration eyeing Venezuelan crude to stabilize global prices, the taps are creaking open. Trump's push for U.S. firms to play a bigger role signals a reboot. This isn't a random glitch in the system. It's a calculated reset, unveiling reserves that could flood markets and rewrite energy geopolitics. The silent ledger of data reveals patterns repeating through history, where hidden wealth surfaces only to be suppressed again. Stick around. The numbers tell the untold story. Venezuela's oil saga, it mirrors historical traps where resource booms breed dependency and decline. The most striking parallel? The silver mines of Potosí in 16th century Spanish colonial Bolivia. In 1545, an indigenous herder named Diego Hualpa accidentally discovered Cerro Rico, the rich hill. He unleashed a torrent of silver that transformed Spain's empire. By the 1670s, Potosí was producing half the world's silver. Its mint was churning out pieces of 8, the coins that became the first global currency. The town ballooned to 200,000 people, rivaling European capitals like London or Paris. But here's the dark side. Spain extracted that wealth through the Mita system, a brutal forced labor draft. It conscripted 1 in 7 indigenous men for deadly mine work, mercury poisoning, cave-ins, the sheer altitude. It claimed lives by the thousands. The crown skimmed its quinto real, a 20% royal tax, while private owners pocketed the rest. Silver flooded Europe, igniting the price revolution. Inflation eroded purchasing power and stifled domestic industry. Spain grew addicted to easy wealth. They neglected agriculture, they ignored manufacturing, and they forgot how to innovate. By the 18th century, yields plummeted, the veins were depleted, the population halved, and the empire decayed into irrelevance. Fast forward to Venezuela. Oil's discovery? It echoes Hualpa's find. In 1914, the Zumaque-1 well struck black gold, kickstarting an industry that by 1928 made Venezuela the world's top exporter. Foreign giants like Shell and Standard Oil flooded in, building isolated enclaves, modern-day Potosís, sitting right in the middle of rural poverty. These oil camps housed expatriates in luxury, while locals toiled in harsh conditions. By the 1930s, oil accounted for 90% of exports, funding those glittering urban booms in Caracas. The 1943 hydrocarbons law demanded a 50-50 profit split, much like Spain's quinto. But dependency set in. Governors treated oil rents as a bottomless purse, subsidizing imports and sidelining every other sector. The 1976 nationalization created PDVSA, the state oil behemoth, mirroring Spain's centralized control. Then the Chavez era amplified the curse. From 1999, he funneled billions into social missions. It lifted millions from poverty, sure, but it starved the infrastructure. Corruption ballooned. The 2002 oil strike led to the firing of 18,000 skilled workers, gutting decades of expertise. And then, U.S. sanctions. Since 2017, they've played the role of those exhausted minds, blocking tech, blocking finance, and slashing output from 2.5 million barrels a day to under 800,000 today.
The mechanisms, they're identical. Extraction without diversification. In Potosí, the allure of silver led to what we now call Dutch disease. The currency soared, and it killed every other export. Venezuela's boulevard did the exact same thing on oil highs. It decimated agriculture. Those legendary coffee and cocoa plantations, they just withered. And then there's elite capture. It never changes. Back then, it was Spanish viceroys. Today, it's the Venezuelan Boliburguesia siphoning off the wealth. Foreign reliance? Same story. Spain had to import tech from German miners. Venezuela? They leaned on U.S. firms for every single drill bit. Even the environmental toll matches. Potosí had mercury poisoning its rivers. The Orinoco operations, they're leaking methane and contaminating aquifers as we speak. Both systems bred the same inequality. It's Potosí's indigenous slaves versus Venezuela's urban poor, both trapped outside the gates of the wealth enclaves. History isn't just a lesson, it's proof of recurrence. What drained Cerro Rico forecasts Venezuela's path, fleeting revivals followed by inevitable busts, unless the pattern shatters. Other echoes are everywhere. Nigeria, since 1956, is the same curse. Booms fund corruption, while manufacturing is left to rot. Saudi Arabia, they dodged it with sovereign funds. But Venezuela, like Spain, they just squandered the windfall. The ledger shows one thing clearly. Resources promise power, but without checks, they just poison the well. Let's audit the trap, because the numbers, they expose the machinery. Venezuela's oil isn't that easy-flowing light crude you find in Texas or Saudi. No, it's extra heavy, viscous stuff, hidden in the Orinoco belt. We're talking 1.2 trillion barrels in place. 300 billion of that is recoverable. Think of it like tar on a hot road. It's sticky, it's dense, it's loaded with sulfur and metals. To get it out, you can't just drill and pump. It requires tech-heavy, expensive processes. First, horizontal drilling. We're going 3,000 feet deep. Then we use SAGD, steam-assisted gravity drainage. You inject steam to heat the bitumen. You have to reduce the viscosity from 5,000 centipoise down to something that actually flows. Think of it like melting butter in a pan just so you can pour it out. Without that heat, it's stuck. Once it's up, you have to blend it with diluents, usually lighter naphtha, just to get it through a pipeline. Then you transport it to upgraders. These are massive billion-dollar facilities that hydrocrack the goo into synthetic crude. The cost? It's staggering. Billions. Pre-2007, giants like Exxon built these. The Petrocedeño upgrader alone could process 200,000 barrels a day. But without the tech and without the capital, that wealth might as well be back in the ground.
But politics jammed the gears. Chavez's 2007 nationalization, it seized those Orinoco projects and compensated the firms poorly. Exxon sued, and they won $1.6 billion. The real loss, though, was the expertise. It just fled. PDVSA inherited the operation, sure, but they lacked the know-how. Look at the money trail. Revenues peaked at $126 billion in 2012, but nearly half of that was diverted to social spending, missions like the Barrio Adentro clinics. It was noble, but it gutted the capital expenditure. Now, the pipelines are over 50 years old and they're leaking. Refineries like Amue are running at 20% capacity after massive explosions. And the corruption, ghost workers, inflated contracts, billions just siphoned away. PDVSA became a black box, opaque accounting, fueling myths of hidden funds. Then came the sanctions. 2017, U.S. bans cut off dollar access. It halted diluent imports. Suddenly, Venezuela was swapping heavy crude for Iranian condensates just to keep things moving, but the volumes dwindled. China loaned $50 billion, repaid in discounted oil. Russia took stakes via Rosneft. Even with OPEC quotas, Venezuela was underproducing anyway. The institutions, they entrenched the trap. PDVSA was once a world-class professional organization. Now it's politicized. Managers are loyalists, not engineers. IMF data shows that debt service alone eats 30% of exports. Chevron's return in 2023 added some volume, about 135,000 barrels a day, but the system needs 8 to 9 billion every year just for maintenance. Think of it like a Ferrari with no mechanic and no fuel. It just sits there, rusting in the garage. Environmentally, it's a disaster. Methane leaks from poor operations are literal bombs. The money flows to creditors, to elites, to allies. It doesn't go to the people. To understand why this is so hard to fix, look at the technical bottlenecks. This isn't just about turning a tap. So what's the forecast? Logic dictates a fatalistic arc. History and data point to a measured revival, but one laced with pitfalls. By 2026 into 2027, production will climb modestly. New reforms are opening the sector. A new hydrocarbons law allows private majority stakes, drawing about $1.4 billion in investments. Chevron is targeting 200,000. ENI and Repsol might add another 100,000. It looks like progress, but unless the pattern of the last 500 years shatters, it's just another cycle in the ledger. The numbers tell the story. You just have to know where to look.
900,000, maybe 1 million barrels a day by the end of 2026. That's an 18% bump. But hurdles loom. Power blackouts from Guri Dam failures halt the pumps. Diluent shortages persist, especially if those ties with Iran begin to fray. And then there's the political volatility. The opposition pushes for elections, while Maduro's allies, well, they resist. For ordinary Venezuelans, it's bittersweet. Gas queues shorten, oil dollars fund imports, easing those brutal food shortages. Wages tick up in the Maracaibo fields, but inflation, still sitting at 50 to 100%, it just erodes the gains. Migrants are returning, but they're straining the already packed Caracas slums. Looking toward 2028, 2030, if stability holds, output might hit 1.4 million barrels. U.S. firms like Exxon might re-enter, investing 8 or 9 billion annually for upgraders. But global prices, they'll likely dip as the surplus grows. And the green shift is accelerating. EVs dominate, renewables undercut demand. Those Orinoco assets, they risk being stranded. 300 billion barrels, potentially worthless if net zero hits by 2050. For the average person, the world darkens. Booms just widen the gaps. You'll see elites on yachts in Puerto La Cruz, while families in Barquisimeto scrape by on $200 a month. Protests erupt over spills contaminating the Orinoco rivers, displacing indigenous communities. Health crises from methane, respiratory issues spike. Diversification fails. Oil is still 90% of exports. The cycle repeats. Prosperity tempts, and the bust follows. There is no escape without a radical break. But the data? The data says otherwise. This is the trajectory. Logic over hope. Numbers, they cut through the noise. Venezuela's veiled reserves echo these eternal traps. From Potosí's silver lodes to the depths of the Orinoco, booms birthing busts. Myths seduce us with miracles, but mechanisms, they ensnare us with the illusions of extraction. History loops, foretelling the ruin of every revival. In the silent ledger, patterns prevail. Empires hunt for hidden riches, only to discover the void.